just companies from France coming to the U.S. and then talk about companies here.
Sure.
So how do you talk to them about sales strategy, and what's their initial idea of entering the market, and how do you kind of work with them to give more of a realistic idea of how to go about things in the pipeline and the sales channels, all that stuff?
The first thing I try to keep in mind always is time. I need them to be realistic. Quite frequently I'll say, I create sales leads. The objective of Sales Factory is to get sales leads, right? Quite often they think I have them in my front pockets.
Okay.
I don't. I'll tell you, the first one to admit I do not. If you show up tomorrow and ask me for those leads, I don't know exactly where I'm going to get them. I'm going to try to source them in different ways, but I don't. Just because you showed up, it doesn't mean I know where to go. So that's the first thing I would say is time. You got to be very realistic with what is appropriate and what's inappropriate in terms of that. And the second thing I would say is be concise. Be as specific as you possibly can for what it is that you're going for. If you want any business in any market in any industry, that's going to be a lot more difficult. If my first statement is time is the first thing you need to understand, and you want any business at all, it's going to take a lot more time to get any business at all. But if you can specifically say, I need a certain market segment I need 5 of these 100 companies, or I want these top 25 companies, these are the guys that I'm going for, then it becomes much, much easier for me to isolate and figure out who I need to contact at those companies, how I can network into those companies, how I can cold call those companies, for example. And so those would be the 2 things I would say initially I run into: time, and then being as concise as you possibly can.
Well, tell me about time, I guess. What are the steps that might take time, and how long would they take?
So what's going to take the most amount of time is understanding what your value proposition is to the U.S. market, who it is you're going to sell the product to, and where you're going to sell it. So what market or what industry, what sector. Quite frequently, sales in Europe is different than sales in the United States. Elsewhere in the world, many people quite often want to know everything that the company does. And they want to know A to Z, right? They want to fully vet the startup, or they want to fully vet the technology before they do anything at all. Here in the US, it's a different sales cycle. If I come to you as a salesman, I am very quickly trying to identify what your need is, and that's what I'm going to sell to, right? This is my product, and it's going to solve this need that you have, and therefore we have what I would call attention, and we have a buying motive. That, I think, is one thing that's a big difference, sales in the US versus sales elsewhere in the world. And so coming here, you do need to understand that mentality, but you also, more than anything, need to understand the mentality that, there will be a market capability, and there will be the need to know that you are going to enter the market in the appropriate way. So you need to enter, so going after the appropriate customers.
Okay. So if a startup came to you and said, this is our product, we want to get connections to these companies, and you looked at it and just said, realistically, no, you should go to these companies, or how would you talk to them to actually give more of a realistic or more guidance from years experience here that they might not have?
Sure. So I would say a lot of it has to do with strategy, and coming up with, before you go out contacting potential customers, before you go selling to those customers, coming up with a strategy for who's the right market, who's the right customer fit. So quite frequently, and that does happen. They'll often say, I'm ready to go into sales. And you go back through the list, and they have no sales support documentation, or they have no ability to deliver the sale if you were to make the sale, right? If I were to pass you a lead, and then the worst thing a salesman can get if I pass you the lead is, oh, well, I can't deliver that sale for another 3 months. And it's like, well, do you know what kind of work just went in for me to get that lead for you? You know how much effort that is. It's a lot of time and blood, sweat, and tears, and nonetheless my blood, sweat, and tears. And so not having the sale, not having the support to deliver the sale is something else that I look very closely at. Will the company be able to deliver the product and service that they say that they have? And quite oftentimes it's by no fault of their own. These are startups. So what you're looking for when you sell for a startup is maybe a little bit more mature of a company, maybe a Series B or Series C, as opposed to a seed rounded a company that's seed or Series A.
What if a seed company or an A-round company comes to you and says, listen, our MVP is now ready. We want to go to market. What's your advice there?
Can I see the MVP? That's my first step is what information you say I'm ready to go to market. Okay, so what makes you think you're ready to go to market? And walk me through that that sales process. One of the great things, one idea that I have is quite often to do a role play with me. So if I were going to buy that product and I were to sit in that sales meeting, how would you sell it to me? How would you position the product? And just be me, like you and me talking right now. Sell it to me as you would anybody else, and see how well the sales pitch is and whether or not you maybe have some of the appropriate documentation. In that role play, what I'll ask for maybe a use case, or I'll ask for white papers, which is sometimes maybe not lacking, but sometimes it could be better, so to speak.
So the documentation, would you recommend the founder do it on his own, or would you recommend them finding professionals, copywriters, or that to work with? Or how would you recommend them creating these documents, these sales sheets?
I think acculturation, what they call is acculturation. So what one word means in French doesn't necessarily mean the same in a direct translation to English. Or there's a certain way of interpreting a phrase or a common saying over in France as opposed to how it would be said here. I don't necessarily know that copyright is necessary all the way. You don't necessarily need to go get a lawyer who can be pretty expensive to copyright something, but certainly taking the advice from somebody who is a native speaker of the language, I would recommend. Saying, if I said to a Frenchman, a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush, they would say, what? Or if I said, hey, close only counts with horseshoes and hand grenades. Or I said, if I just nonchalantly said, hey, horseshoes and hand grenades. And you would know what I meant, right? Because close only counts. They would have no clue. Whereas in that language, in that culture, there's a different way to say that, right? So that's acculturation. I think there's a big difference between translation and making sure you get it culturally correct.
Okay, now let's go for a startup here in the U.S. that you're working with.
Sure.
Local Silicon Valley trying to work with. They come to you. They don't have any sales material yet. How would you go about coaching them on getting that?
That's almost where there would be a breaking point, is where I wouldn't necessarily sell for them right away as much as I would say, this is the type of information that I would like to see before I sell.
Okay.
That would be kind of a red flag for me. If you don't have white papers, or if you don't have, if you don't know what your target market is.
Just wondering for people out there.
A white paper is something that you might pick up at a trade show. Just a one-page PDF write-up on whatever the product or service is. That you can easily hand, and if I were to read through it, it would give me I would have a good understanding of what the product is or services that you're attempting to sell.
Oh,